He was sitting on the front steps of my house when I pulled into the driveway. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of November, and the temperature had dropped enough that you could see your breath. He had his daughter with him. She was 4 years old and wearing a pink jacket that wasn't quite warm enough for the weather. He had one bag with him. One bag for both of them. I turned off the car and sat there for a moment before I got out. I had come home early because I had a deposition to review before morning. I was not expecting this. I got out of the car and walked toward him, and I did not say anything yet, because I could see from the way he was sitting, hunched forward, elbows on his knees, not looking up, that whatever had happened was bad. My daughter-in-law had been unhappy for a while. That was not new, but I had not expected this. He finally looked up when he heard my footsteps on the gravel. "She told me to get out," he said. "She changed the password on the security system so I can't get back in." I looked at him. Then I looked at my granddaughter, who was sitting beside him with a stuffed rabbit in her lap, watching me with her serious brown eyes. "Come inside," I said. "Both of you. I need to explain something about myself, because it matters for what happened next. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years working in real estate law in Ottawa, and before that, I articled with a firm in Toronto that handled nothing but estate disputes and property litigation. I have seen what happens when people do not understand their rights. I have seen what happens when someone acts quickly and decisively before the other side has a chance to establish a position. I have also seen what happens when people panic, and I have learned that panic does not help you. Panic is something you do after the situation is resolved. During the situation, you think. My son is 34 years old. He is a structural engineer. He is good at his work, careful and methodical, and he is kind in ways that sometimes make me worried for him because the world does not always reward kindness. He had been with his wife for 6 years, married for 3. They had bought their house together, or rather, they had bought it together with a significant contribution from her parents, which I had warned him at the time to make sure was documented properly, and which I was now very much hoping he had listened to. I got my granddaughter settled in the kitchen with some crackers and a glass of apple juice, and then I sat down across from my son at the kitchen table, and I looked at him. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said. "Not how you feel about it. What happened?" He told me. They had been arguing more than usual for the past several months. His wife had told him 2 weeks ago that she wanted to separate. He said he had agreed to try to work through it properly, through a mediator, and that they had agreed he would stay in the house until they figured out the next steps. He said that this morning she had told him she had spoken to her parents, and that her parents felt it was better if he left. He said she had handed him a bag she had packed for him. One bag. Just some clothes, and told him to take their daughter and go, and that she had changed the security code on the house. I listened to all of this without interrupting. "Did you sign anything?" I said. "No." "Did she give you anything in writing?" "No." "Is your name on the mortgage?" "Yes." "Is your name on the title?" "Yes." I sat back. I looked at him for a moment. He was 34 years old, and he looked about 17, sitting there in my kitchen with the particular expression of someone who believes they have lost everything. "Okay," I said. "She cannot do that." He looked at me. "She changed the locks," he said. "I understand that," I said. "She cannot do that. You are on title. You are on the mortgage. You have the same legal right to occupy that property as she does. What she did this morning is not a legal separation. It is not a court order. It is one person acting unilaterally on a jointly owned property, and it does not stand." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do I do?" That is the question I had been waiting for, because it was the right question. Not what do I feel, not is this fair, not can you believe she did this. What do I do? When someone asks me that question, I can actually help them. I poured us both some coffee, and I started to walk him through it. The first thing I told him was that he needed to write down everything he could remember about that morning, in as much detail as possible, with times. The conversation, the bag, the moment she told him the security code had been changed. Not because we would necessarily use it, but because memory is unreliable and documentation is not, and you want to have your record of events before anything else happens. The second thing I told him was that he needed to make a list of what was in that house. Not just the big things, the furniture, the appliances, but the documents. His passport, his SIM card, any financial statements, his daughter's health card, her immunization records, her medications, if she had any. Anything that was his and anything that was jointly necessary for the child. Her medication, he said suddenly. He looked at his daughter in the other room. Her EpiPen. It's in the cabinet in the kitchen. That, I told him, was urgent. The rest could wait. A child's emergency medication cannot wait. I called a colleague of mine. She had been a family law litigator for 27 years, and she owed me a favor from a complicated property matter I had helped her untangle 3 years earlier. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, and she picked up on the second ring. I explained the situation briefly. She asked me a few questions. Then she said she had a cancellation first thing the next morning and could see my son at 8 o'clock. When I hung up, I looked at him and I said, "You have an appointment tomorrow morning with a family lawyer. Her name is Audra. She is very good. You will bring everything you have written down and you will answer her questions honestly and completely, and you will let her tell you what to do next." He nodded. "But tonight," I said, "we are going to get that EpiPen." He looked alarmed. "She won't let us in." "She doesn't have to let us in," I said. "You have a key. You are on title. You are allowed to enter your own home." "But the security code." "The alarm will go off," I said. "That is fine. The alarm going off is not a crime. The alarm going off is an alarm going off. You go in, you get the EpiPen and whatever else your daughter needs for the night, and you come back here. If your wife calls the police will determine that you are on title and you are within your rights." He was quiet. "I know this feels wrong," I said. "It feels wrong because you are a reasonable person and you want to do this reasonably. But she did not give you that option this morning. She made a decision without you, and she is counting on you not knowing what your rights are. I am telling you what your rights are." He looked at his daughter again. She had finished her crackers and was now arranging her stuffed rabbit on the kitchen chair with great seriousness. "Okay," he said. We drove over together, the three of us. I sat in the back seat with my granddaughter so that my son could focus. The house was a semi-detached on a street in the west end of the city, a nice street with big old maples that had already dropped most of their leaves. The lights were on inside. My son rang the doorbell first. His wife answered. Her mother was visible behind her in the hallway, and I noted that because it told me something about how planned this had been. His wife looked at him, then at me, then back at him. She said, "What are you doing here? I told you." "We're here for her EpiPen," my son said, "and a few other things she needs." His wife looked at me then with an expression I recognized. I have been in enough difficult situations in my professional life to know what it looks like when someone is calculating whether they have made a mistake. She was calculating. "You can't just come in here," she said. I spoke then because I had been standing quietly and it was time to stop standing quietly. "He is on title," I said. "He is a joint owner of this property and he has the right to enter it. He is also the father of that child and he has the right to access anything she needs for her safety. We are here for the EpiPen, her overnight bag, and her bear. We are not here for anything else tonight." Her mother started to say something from behind her in the hallway. I looked at her mother. Her mother stopped. My son's wife stepped back from the door. We went in. My son went to the kitchen. I stood in the doorway with my granddaughter, who had found a small toy on the front hall table and was examining it with interest, unaware that the adults in the room were engaged in something that would matter to her for the rest of her life. My son came back with the EpiPen, with the small backpack his daughter used for daycare, with her bear, which had apparently been left on the stairs, and with a folder of papers he had found on the kitchen counter. He showed me the folder quietly, and I looked at the first page and I recognized what it was. It was a draft separation agreement prepared by a lawyer, dated that week. His wife had had a lawyer draft an agreement before she had asked him to leave. She had not told him there was an agreement. She had planned this. I handed the folder back to him without expression. "Bring that," I said. We left. My son strapped his daughter into her car seat and got in and drove and did not say anything for a few blocks. Then he said she had a lawyer already. "I know," I said. "She had this planned." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "What does that mean for us?" "It means," I said, "that you are lucky you came to my house and not somewhere else. And it means that tomorrow morning, you and Audra are going to go through that agreement very carefully, because whatever she has in that draft is the starting position, not the ending position. And you are going to know exactly what you are dealing with before you sign a single word." That night I made dinner. Baked chicken, roasted potatoes, the things I keep on hand, and my granddaughter ate enthusiastically and told me at length about a bird she had seen at daycare that week. A pigeon, I thought, though she described it as being very large and possibly purple. My son ate quietly and mostly listened to his daughter talk, and I watched him starting to come back to himself a little, the way people do when they are in a safe place and they have a plan. After she was asleep in the spare room, my son and I sat at the kitchen table with the separation agreement between us. It was not, I will say, the worst agreement I had ever seen, but it was written very much in her favor. The house that was in both their names that they had both paid into for 3 years. She had proposed to buy out his share at assessed value, minus an offset for the $60,000 her parents had contributed to the down payment. Which sounds reasonable until you understand that they had never formalized that contribution. There was no loan agreement, there was no gift letter, there was no documentation at all, because at the time, they had all agreed it was a family matter and paperwork seemed cold. When families say paperwork seems cold, what they mean is that they have not yet had to sit at a kitchen table at 9 in the evening reconstructing what was agreed. My son looked at me. "She's saying the $60,000 comes off the top of my share," he said, "even though we were both paying the mortgage for 3 years?" "Yes," I said. "That is what she is proposing." "Can she do that?" "Her lawyer can propose it," I said. "Audra will have thoughts about whether it will hold up, given that there is no documentation. The absence of documentation cuts both ways. It means there is no proof it was a loan, but it also means there is no proof of the specific terms. Her parents gave you that money. Whether it was a gift or a loan is now a question, and questions in family law are arguments, and arguments take time and cost money and are often settled somewhere in the middle." He put his head in his hands briefly, then he lifted it. "What about her?" he said, and I knew he meant his daughter. "Audra will help you understand what shared custody looks like in Ontario. The default is shared parenting unless there is a reason not to. You have been present, you have been involved, you are her primary caregiver on your days. That is not nothing." I looked at him. "You are not starting from nothing. I want you to understand that." He nodded. "And the EpiPen," he said. "Going in there like that?" "You did nothing wrong," I said. "You entered your own home to retrieve emergency medication for your child. If she wants to argue about that, she can explain to a family court judge why she changed the security code on a jointly owned home to prevent the child's other parent from entering." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought I'd lost everything," he said. "When I was sitting on your steps, I thought that was it." I looked at him across the table. He had my father's eyes, that particular shade of gray that goes darker when he is upset, which I had been watching my whole life, first in my father and then in him. "You were sitting on my steps," I said, "which means you had not lost everything. You had a place to go. You have always had a place to go." The next morning, my son met with Audra at 8 o'clock. I did not go with him. He was 34 years old, and he needed to walk into that office himself and speak for himself. But I did drive him there, and I sat in the car with my granddaughter, and we listened to a children's program on the radio and ate the muffins I had made that morning, and we waited. He came out an hour and 20 minutes later. He looked different. Not better exactly, but steadier. Like a person who has been given information and has decided to use it. He got in the car, My granddaughter offered him part of her muffin, and he took it solemnly and ate it. She says the $60,000 argument is weak without documentation, he said. She says we have a strong position on the house valuation. She says the custody arrangement we can probably negotiate without going to court if we start from a clear position. Good, I said. She also said, he stopped. She said that whoever changed those locks without a court order put themselves in a bad position, that it shows a certain pattern of decision-making. She said she would be noting it. I nodded. Is that important? He said. It is a piece of information, I said. Everything is a piece of information. Audra knows what to do with it. We drove back to my house. It was a cold morning but bright. One of those November days in Ottawa, when the sky is such a hard, clear blue that it almost hurts to look at it, and the bare trees are black against it, and everything looks very sharp and clean. I will tell you what I know about situations like this one, because I have been watching them for 31 years. I have watched families fall apart and come back together in different shapes. I have watched people make decisions in moments of anger that cost them years of their lives. I have watched people get very quiet and very strategic and come through things they thought would finish them. The people who get through it are not always the ones who are right. Being right does not protect you. What protects you is knowing what you actually have, knowing your own ground, knowing what is yours and what cannot be taken from you. My son had thought, sitting on those steps, that he had nothing. He had a bag of clothes and his daughter beside him and nowhere to go. But he had documentation in his own name on a jointly owned property. He had 3 years of mortgage payments that could be traced. He had a mother who had spent 31 years learning exactly how these situations work and who happened to be home early that Tuesday afternoon. He had an appointment the next morning with someone who knew what to do with what he had. And he had his daughter, who was at that moment in the back seat, asking me very seriously whether pigeons could be purple and whether I thought there was one living on my street. I think probably not, I said, but I've been wrong before. He had more than he thought. That is almost always the truth of it. I have been home for 22 days now since that afternoon, and things are moving. They are not resolved. These things do not resolve in 22 days, but they are moving in a direction. My son is staying with me for the time being. His daughter is with him every Tuesday, Thursday, and every other weekend, which is the temporary arrangement they agreed to while the formal process continues. She has started to treat my spare room as her room, which I find I do not mind at all. His wife's lawyer sent a revised proposal last week. The $60,000 offset had been reduced significantly. Audra said that was expected. The house will be sold. That was the decision they reached together without going to court because in the end, neither of them wanted to fight about it in front of a judge. And Audra had made it clear that fighting about it in front of a judge was an option my son was prepared to take if necessary. Sometimes being prepared to do something is enough. You do not always have to do it. You just have to mean it. What I want you to take from this, and I say this as someone who has watched this particular situation play out in more kitchens and more offices than I can count, is that the moment when you think you have lost everything is almost never the moment when you have actually lost everything. It is the moment when everything is uncertain, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. But it is not the same as loss. Know your rights. Document what matters. Find the right person to help you understand what you actually have. And if you are lucky, find a place to sit down and think. My son found mine. I am glad he knew it was there. I have been thinking about that Tuesday afternoon a lot lately. Not the dramatic parts. Not the moment we stood in the doorway while her mother tried to find her voice. Not the folder of papers my son picked up off the counter. I keep thinking about the moment before any of that. My son on those front steps, hunched forward, not looking up. One bag. A 4-year-old beside him who didn't fully understand what was happening but could feel it, the way children always can. What strikes me now is how close it came to going a different way. Not because the situation was hopeless. It wasn't, not legally, not practically, but because he almost didn't come to me. He told me later that he had sat on those steps for almost 20 minutes before I pulled into the driveway. He'd been trying to figure out where to go. He wasn't sure he wanted to burden me. He was embarrassed, I think, in the way that people are when they believe that needing help is a failure rather than a circumstance. That is the thing I want to say something about because I think it matters. There is a version of my son that doesn't come to my house. That goes to a friend's place and sits there feeling helpless and wakes up the next morning without an appointment, without a lawyer, without any of the information he needed. That version of my son signed something he shouldn't have signed because he didn't know he had options. I have seen that version play out more times than I care to count in my professional life and in my personal one. People in crisis make decisions from a position of fear, and fear shrinks what you can see. It makes a moment feel permanent. What saved my son was not luck, though luck played a role. I did happen to come home early, and I did happen to have the right knowledge and the right contacts. But what really saved him was that when everything fell apart, he made one decent decision. He went somewhere safe, and he told the truth about what had happened. He didn't minimize it, didn't try to manage how it looked, didn't pretend he had a plan when he didn't. He sat down and said, "I don't know what to do." That takes something, actually. It takes a kind of honesty with yourself that is harder than it sounds when you are embarrassed and frightened and your whole life has just been rearranged without your consent. And then he listened. He asked the right question, not "Why is this happening to me?" Not "Is this fair?" but "What do I do?" And then he actually did what he was told. He went to the appointment. He brought the documents. He let Audra do her job. That steadiness, that willingness to follow a path even when you can't see where it ends, is what got him through. I think about my granddaughter describing that purple pigeon on the drive back from Audra's office. She had no idea what the adults around her were navigating, and I think that is, in the end, what all of this was for. Not winning. Not the revised proposal or the reduced offset or the position we established before anything was signed. It was so that she could sit in the back seat and talk about pigeons without the weight of two adults who had given up. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to take the next right step and then the one after that, and trust that doing things with honesty and care will get you further than doing things out of panic or spite. It usually does. Not always as quickly as you'd like. Not always with the outcome you imagined, but further. My son is okay. His daughter is okay. That is enough for right now, and right now is what we have. I pulled into the parking lot of Confederation Park before my engine had fully stopped. I saw her the moment I stepped out. My daughter sitting on a bench near the fountain, two overstuffed suitcases at her feet, and my granddaughter pressed against her side. It was February. It was minus 17 degrees, and neither of them was wearing a proper coat. I didn't run. I walked. Calmly. The way you learn to walk when 63 years of life have taught you that panic helps no one, and clarity helps everyone. "Mom." Her voice cracked when she saw me. I sat beside her, pulled my granddaughter into my arms without a word, and looked at my daughter's face. She had been crying for a long time. I could tell by the way her eyes had gone almost completely flat, past tears, past fear, somewhere out the other side of it. "Tell me," I said. She told me. Her brother-in-law, her husband's older brother, had shown up at their house that morning with a notary and two documents. One was a separation of assets agreement. The other was a letter already signed by her husband stating that she was voluntarily vacating the family property. Her husband had stood in the kitchen and not looked at her once, while his brother explained that her name had never been on the deed, that the house had always belonged to the family trust, and that she had 30 minutes to gather what she needed. Her daughter had been eating cereal at the table. "He said my name was an embarrassment to the family," she told me quietly. "He said David had made a mistake marrying below them." He actually used those words, below them. My granddaughter, who was 7 years old and had her mother's eyes, looked up at me and said, "Grandma, are we going to your house?" I kissed the top of her head. "We are, sweetheart. We absolutely are." I looked at my daughter. "Did you sign anything?" "No." I laughed. Good girl, I thought. I raised her well. "Where is David now?" She shook her head. She didn't know. He hadn't called. That had been 4 hours ago. I stood up, picked up the smaller suitcase, and nodded at the other. Come on, we'll get you warm. And then I'm going to make some calls. What my daughter did not fully understand, what her brother-in-law certainly did not understand, was what I had done for the previous 31 years before I quietly retired. I had spent my career in corporate restructuring. I had been the person companies called when something had gone terribly wrong, when money had gone missing, when partnerships had collapsed, when someone had been very clever and very dishonest for a very long time and everyone else had missed it. I had built my own firm by the time I was 41. I had sold it at 58. I was on the board of 2 companies in Ontario and 1 in British Columbia. My name was not famous. I had made sure of that. Famous names attract the wrong kind of attention. What I had instead was a very quiet, very extensive network of people who owed me significant favors. Her brother-in-law's name was Gerald Ashworth. He was 51 years old. He ran the family construction company, Ashworth & Sons, which had been building mid-range residential developments in the Greater Toronto Area for 22 years. He drove a black Range Rover and wore the kind of suit that was expensive enough to signal money but not expensive enough to suggest haste. I had met him exactly 4 times. Each time he had shaken my hand with that particular grip men use when they want you to know they're not taking you seriously. I had smiled pleasantly each time. I had also remembered everything. I settled my daughter and granddaughter into my house in Oakville. The guest rooms were always made up, one of my small private habits, and made chamomile tea and scrambled eggs because my granddaughter had said she was still hungry. While they ate, I went to my office and closed the door. I called Patricia first. Patricia had been a real estate lawyer for 30 years and had done title searches on half the residential properties in Halton and Peel region. I gave her the address of my daughter's house. I need to know the complete ownership history, I said. The trust structure, if there is one. Who filed it, when, and whether there are any irregularities. How quickly? Yesterday. She laughed. I'll call you by 9 tonight. Then I called Marcus, who had worked in forensic accounting and now consulted privately. I told him the name of the company. I told him what I was looking for. What am I looking for specifically? He asked. I don't know yet, I said. That's why I need you. I knew from 30 years of this work that people who move this aggressively and this quickly are usually afraid of something. Gerald had not shown up that morning with a notary and pre-signed documents because he was offended by his sister-in-law's lineage. People do not hire notaries over wounded pride. They hire notaries when something is about to happen that they need to get ahead of. Something was wrong with Ashworth & Sons. I just needed to find out what. While I waited for Patricia and Marcus to call back, I sat with my granddaughter and read her 2 chapters of the book she'd been carrying in her backpack, a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web, its spine bent soft from repeated reading. My daughter fell asleep on the couch under a wool blanket. She hadn't slept, she told me. Not in 2 days. I watched my daughter sleep and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something older and quieter than anger. The particular resolve of a woman who has spent her life solving complicated problems and has just been handed one that is personal. Patricia called at 8:47. The house, she told me, was registered under a family trust called the Ashworth Family Holdings Trust, established in 1987. However, the trust had been modified 6 years ago in a way that was, in her professional opinion, legally questionable. A clause had been inserted by a notary in Mississauga, not the family's original lawyer, that essentially allowed Gerald, as the named administrator, to unilaterally remove occupants from any trust-held property in the event of a family dissolution event. The language was vague. The process by which it had been inserted into the original trust document was not transparent. Someone added that clause quietly, Patricia said. The question is whether David knew about it. Can it be challenged? Absolutely. Especially since your daughter never signed a cohabitation agreement and has a child in the home. There are occupancy rights here. He can't just evict them with a letter. I know, I said. What I need is to understand why he tried. Marcus called at 9:10. He had been doing preliminary work, public filings, CCPC records, a few calls to contacts in the development industry. What he had found in 4 hours was enough to make me sit forward in my chair. Ashworth & Sons had 3 large development projects currently under construction in the Brampton and Mississauga areas. 2 of them had been financed through a federally backed housing incentive program, one of the government programs designed to increase affordable housing supply. These programs had significant reporting requirements. Developers were required to certify that a specific percentage of units would be designated at below market rates. Preliminary indications suggested the certifications filed by Ashworth & Sons did not match the actual unit allocation in at least one of the projects. "How significant?" I asked. "If it's what it looks like," Marcus said, "we're talking about federal funding obtained under false pretenses. Could be in the range of 3 to 4 million. I was quiet for a moment. "And David?" I said. "Is he involved?" "His name is on some of the filings as a signing officer. But I need more time to determine whether that was active participation or whether he was used as a signature." I suspected the latter. My son-in-law was not a malicious man. He was a weak one. There is a difference, though it does not make the consequences any less real. He had spent his entire adult life being managed by his older brother. I had seen it at every family gathering. The way Gerald spoke over him, the way David agreed to things and then looked at the floor. Something had happened. Perhaps David had finally asked questions he wasn't supposed to ask. Perhaps he had seen something in the company's books. Perhaps Gerald had decided it was tidier to remove my daughter from the picture before whatever was coming became impossible to contain. To ensure that when the financial situation unraveled, there would be no one in the household who might have access to documents, conversations, information. Gerald had tried to clear the house before the house of cards fell. The problem for Gerald was that he had not done his research about whose mother he was dealing with. Over the following 3 weeks, I worked carefully and without announcing myself. Marcus completed his analysis. Patricia prepared a detailed legal opinion on the trust modification. I also engaged a colleague of mine, a retired RCMP financial crimes investigator who now did private consulting, to review the federal program filings. What emerged was a clear picture. Gerald had used his brother's signature on certification documents to claim funding designations that did not exist. He had structured it so that if questions were ever asked, the paperwork trail would lead to David before it led to him. David, I was now certain, had recently discovered some portion of this and had confronted his brother. The eviction had been Gerald's response, a controlled demolition of David's home life, designed to leave David isolated, destabilized, and far less likely to cooperate with any investigation. It was, I had to admit, a reasonably intelligent strategy. It simply had not accounted for me. I called my daughter into the kitchen one morning while my granddaughter was at school. I had enrolled her at the elementary school 2 streets over, and she had adapted with the extraordinary resilience children sometimes show when they are surrounded by love at home. I told my daughter what I had found, not all of it. Enough. She was quiet for a long time. "David didn't know," she finally said. "I believe he found out. I believe he found out. I believe that's why this happened." She pressed her hands flat on the kitchen table and looked at them. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give Gerald an opportunity to make this right quietly," I said. "He won't take it. But I want it on record that he had the chance." She looked at me. "And if he doesn't?" I refilled my tea. "Then I'm going to make some additional calls." I had my lawyer send a letter to Gerald's personal lawyer. The letter did not make accusations. It outlined with careful precision that we were aware of the circumstances surrounding the trust modification, that we had retained counsel to challenge my daughter's removal from the property, and that there were ancillary financial matters we would be examining in detail unless a full resolution, including the restoration of my daughter's occupancy rights and a formal review of all documents David had signed as a company officer, was completed within 14 days. Gerald's lawyer responded within 48 hours. The letter was dismissive. Gerald apparently was not concerned. I had expected that. I had not told Gerald's lawyer or Gerald that Marcus's full report had already been provided to 2 people. The first was a journalist who covered housing policy and financial irregularities for a national publication and who had been carefully investigating federal housing incentive program misuse for 8 months. The second was a contact I had maintained for many years, a senior investigator with the Canada Revenue Agency's Special Compliance Division. I did not file a complaint. I did not make a public statement. I simply provided accurate information through proper channels to people whose job it was to look at exactly this kind of thing. The Ashworth situation was not the only one of its kind. The journalist already had 4 similar cases on file. Mine gave her the documentation she needed to move forward with her story. I would like to say there was a single dramatic moment. There often isn't. What there was instead was a sequence of events over about 6 weeks that each arrived quietly and then landed heavily. The first was a call to Ashworth & Sons from a federal housing program administrator requesting an urgent documentation review. The second was a story in a national publication about irregularities in federally funded housing development projects in the GTA. Gerald's company was one of 3 named. The third was a formal notice of audit from the CRA. The fourth, and this one I learned about secondhand through a contact who knew someone on Gerald's legal team, was the moment Gerald understood that the documentation trail did not point only to David, that Marcus's forensic review had clearly identified the modification dates and signing sequences in a way that was not favorable to Gerald's preferred version of events. David called my daughter on a Thursday evening. He had left the family home. Or rather, he had been asked to leave by Gerald's lawyers, who were now, I suspected, trying to create as much distance as possible between their client and everyone connected to the company. David's voice on the phone, she told me afterward, sounded like a man who had been underwater for a month and had only just broken the surface. He had known something was wrong for about a year. He had asked Gerald about one of the project filings. Gerald had told him it was handled, that David didn't need to understand the details, that he should focus on his part of the operation. When David had looked more closely, Gerald had threatened him, quietly, in the way older brothers threaten younger ones, with what he would do to David's marriage, his standing, his name, if David caused problems. So David had frozen, and I understood that, even as I held my daughter's hand while she processed it. My son-in-law was not a hero. But he was not, in the end, the villain of this story either. In March, the federal housing body confirmed it would be seeking repayment of approximately $3.4 million in improperly claimed incentive funding from Ashworth & Sons. Gerald retained a criminal defense lawyer. 2 other contractors connected to the projects hired their own counsel. The trust modification was successfully challenged. The notary in Mississauga, it turned out, had also made modifications to 2 other client documents in legally questionable ways and was facing a separate regulatory complaint. My daughter's name was added to the property title as part of the legal resolution. It was not a triumphant moment exactly. She had already told me she did not want to live in that house. Too many mornings standing in that kitchen feeling small. But it mattered that the record was corrected. In April, my granddaughter told me, very seriously, over breakfast, that she wanted to be a lawyer when she grew up because Grandma knows everything. I told her lawyers were very important. I also told her that knowing everything required paying very close attention for a very long time and that most people got impatient and that patience was actually a form of power most people never learned to use properly. She thought about this for a moment. Gerald wasn't patient, she said. 7 years old. I nearly knocked my tea over. No, I said. He really wasn't. My daughter found a position at a financial services firm in downtown Toronto. She had always been good with numbers. I suppose that particular skill found its way through to her, whether by nature or by all those years of watching me at my desk. She and my granddaughter found a condo near Christie Pitts on a street with old oak trees and a bakery on the corner that made the whole block smell like cardamom on weekend mornings. She called me on the first Sunday after they moved in, and I could hear through the phone that she was standing near an open window and that she was, carefully and quietly, becoming herself again. I drove up one Saturday in April to help hang curtains and put together a bookshelf from a flat-pack box that required 32 separate steps and had instructions written by someone with a fundamentally different philosophy of communication than I possess. My granddaughter handed me tools with great ceremony and told me I was doing a wonderful job. My daughter ordered butter chicken from a place 2 blocks over and we ate it on the floor because the table hadn't arrived yet. And my granddaughter fell asleep between us before 8 o'clock, and I sat there in that half-assembled apartment and felt something that I can only describe as complete. Gerald's legal situation was still unfolding. These things take time. I had been in this industry long enough to know that financial misconduct cases of this scale rarely resolve quickly. What I knew with certainty was that the documentation was solid, the paper trail was clear, and that Gerald Ashworth had made a critical, fundamental mistake. He had looked at a 63-year-old woman at a family dinner and seen someone who did not need to be taken seriously. He had not asked a single question about who she was or what she had built. He had simply assumed. And in my experience, assumption is the single most expensive habit a person can have. I have been asked since whether I felt any satisfaction. I have thought carefully about that question, the way I try to think carefully about most things. I don't think satisfaction is quite the right word. Satisfaction implies I wanted something for myself, and I didn't really. What I wanted was for my daughter to stop looking at the floor when she talked. What I wanted was for my granddaughter to not grow up believing that a 7-year-old in a borrowed coat at a February park bench was simply how life went. What I wanted was for the record to reflect what had actually happened, because I have spent 30 years learning that the most dangerous thing in the world is not malice, it is inaccuracy, left uncorrected. The record has been corrected. My daughter calls me every Sunday. My granddaughter sends me drawings. She is currently very interested in horses, though she has never ridden one, and each horse is more elaborately detailed than the last. I have them on the wall in my office, next to the window that looks out at the lake. I still sit on 2 boards. I still take calls from people who need a particular kind of help. I make my tea and I sit at my desk and I pay attention, because paying attention is what I have always done. And it is, I think, the closest thing I have to a superpower. It is enough. More than enough. There was a moment in the middle of all of this, sometime in late February, when the legal work was underway and Marcus was still compiling his report and nothing had resolved yet. When my daughter came into the kitchen late at night and found me at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She sat down across from me and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "How are you not scared?" I looked at her. She had her father's way of asking questions. Direct, a little searching, hoping you'll tell the whole truth. "I'm scared of the same things everyone is scared of," I said. "Losing people, time running out, not doing enough with what you have." She waited. "But Gerald..." I shook my head. "Gerald is a man who made a plan using information that was 30 years out of date. There's nothing frightening about that. That's just a problem with a solution." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "I should have called you right away, when I first saw the documents." "Yes," I said, "you should have." And then I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "But you called eventually, and that's what mattered." I found him on the bench outside the Tim Hortons on Bank Street, the one near the bridge, with a duffel bag and a black garbage bag and my granddaughter Maple asleep against his shoulder. It was the 2nd week of November, and the wind off the Ratto Canal had teeth in it. He was wearing the jacket I gave him for his 35th birthday. The one I told him was too thin for an Ottawa winter, and his hands were red. Maple had her little pink boots on, and one of them was untied. That was the first thing I noticed, the untied boot. I don't know why that was the thing that made my chest go cold, but it was. He looked up at me when I sat down beside him, and he did not cry. That was the second thing. My son, who used to cry when he scraped his knee, who cried at his father's funeral until he had no voice left, who cried the day Maple was born because he was so happy he could not stand it. He looked at me with the flat, exhausted face of a man who has run out of feelings to spend, and he said, "Mom, The mother-in-law changed the locks. I don't have anywhere to go, I said. Yes, you do. I picked up the garbage bag, which had clothes in it, and I picked up the duffel, which had her stuffed bear sticking out the top, and I told him to carry Maple to the car. I parked illegally outside the Tims. I did not care. I would have parked on the steps of Parliament that day. He stood up slow, like an old man, and I watched him buckle Maple into the back seat of my Subaru, and she did not wake up, which told me something about how long they had been sitting on that bench. Kids only sleep that deep when they have given up on being woken. I drove us back to my place in Westboro, and I did not say a single word the whole way because I knew if I opened my mouth, I would say something I could not take back. I am 63 years old. I have been a real estate paralegal at Henderson Mowat LLP in downtown Ottawa for 28 years. I have processed thousands of property transfers. I have read more title searches than most lawyers will read in their lifetime. And I have one rule that I have lived by since the day my husband Owen passed and left me with a 14-year-old boy and a mortgage I did not understand. The rule is this: when your hands are shaking, do not sign anything, do not say anything, do not say anything, and do not let the other person see the shake. So I drove. I made tea when we got home. I tucked Mabel into the guest room with the quilt my own mother stitched for me when I got married in 1986, and I sat my son down at the kitchen table and I said, "Tell me everything. Start at the part I do not know." His name is Spencer. He is 37. He has been married to a woman named Janelle for 6 years, and they have one daughter, Maple, who turned 4 in September. Spencer works as a logistics coordinator at a freight company in Kanata. He's a good man, my son. He is not a fighter. His father was not a fighter either. We are not a family of fighters. We are a family of people who keep our heads down and do the work and assume that if we are decent to people, people will be decent back. This belief has cost us more than I want to admit. Spencer told me that he and Janelle had been having a hard time for the better part of a year. Money mostly. Janelle had left her job at the dental clinic in 2024 to start an online business selling some kind of skincare, and the business had not worked out and the credit card debt had grown teeth. Spencer had been picking up overtime shifts and trying to keep them above water. He told me he had not wanted to worry me. He told me he thought they could figure it out. He always thinks he can figure it out. The house they lived in, the bungalow on Sherwood Drive in Barhaven, was technically in Janelle's mother's name. Her mother is a woman named Rosamund. I met her 3 times, at the wedding, at Maple's baptism, and at a Christmas dinner where she spent the entire meal explaining to me why French immersion schools were ruining the country. She is a piece of work, that one. 68 years old, retired from the federal public service with a defined benefit pension that she will remind you about within the first 10 minutes of meeting her, and a way of speaking to her own daughter that made me want to leave the room every time I heard it. Rosamund had bought the bungalow in 2019, just before the market lost its mind. Spencer and Janelle had been living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Vanier, and Janelle was newly pregnant, and Rosamund had offered to buy them a house. Her exact words, Spencer told me, had been, "Consider it a gift. You don't need to pay me back." But she had put it in her own name. For tax purposes, she had said, to keep things simple. And Spencer, my son, who trusts people, had said okay. He had said thank you. He had moved his pregnant wife into the bungalow on Sherwood Drive, and he had paid every single utility bill, every property tax installment, every roof repair, every furnace replacement, every penny of upkeep for 5.5 years. Because Rosamund said she was a senior on a fixed income and could not afford the ongoing costs, even though she had given them the house. He had given her, over those 5.5 years, approximately $52,000 in property tax payments, repairs, and what she called contributions to the family. He had a number for me. He had been keeping track in a notebook. Not because he expected to need the number, he said, but because his father had taught him, when he was a boy, to keep track of money. That was Owen's only rule. Write it down. Always write it down. I almost cried when he told me that. I had forgotten Owen used to say that. 2 days before I found him on the bench, Spencer and Janelle had a fight. Not a yelling fight, a quiet fight, which is the worst kind. Janelle told him she had been talking to her mother, and her mother thought it would be best if Spencer moved out for a while to give them space. Spencer said, "Okay." He said he understood. He said he would stay at a friend's place in Hintonburg for a few days. He took a duffel bag of clothes. He left Maple with Janelle because Janelle was Maple's mother, and he was not going to take a 4-year-old to a friend's apartment in the middle of November. He was gone for one day. On the second day, Janelle called him crying. She said her mother had shown up at the bungalow that morning with a locksmith and a moving company, and she had told Janelle that Spencer was not coming back. She had told Janelle that Spencer had been mentally unstable, that she had been worried about him for months, that the best thing for Maple was for Janelle and Maple to move in with her at her condo in Sentrytown until things settled down. The locksmith had changed the locks on the bungalow. The movers had put everything of Spencer's, every shirt, every book, every photograph, every tool into 2 garbage bags by the front door. Janelle was crying because she didn't know what to do. She loved her mother. She was scared of her mother. She had been scared of her mother her whole life, and she had never told Spencer that until that phone call. Spencer drove from Hintonburg to Sherwood Drive, and his key did not work. He rang the bell. Rosamond opened the door. She was wearing what he described as her church coat, which is the navy wool coat she wears when she wants to look respectable, and she told him on the front step of the house he had been paying for 5.5 years that he was no longer welcome there. She told him the house was hers, that the law was on her side, that he had no legal claim, and that if he tried to come in, she would call the police and tell them he was harassing her and her daughter. She told him to take the 2 garbage bags. She told him to think about what he had put his family through. He took the garbage bags. He did not call the police. He did not call me. He went back to his friend's apartment in Hintonburg, and he sat on the couch for a few hours, and then his friend's roommate came home and said something rude about him being there, and Spencer realized he could not stay. He drove back to Barhaven and parked outside the bungalow and watched the lights because Maple's bedroom light was on, and he was trying to figure out how to get his daughter back without making things worse. He sat in that car all night. In the morning, Janelle texted him. She told him her mother was at a doctor's appointment and that he should come to the back door. He did. She opened the door with Maple already dressed, in her pink boots and her purple coat, with the stuffed bear in her arms. Janelle was crying. She said she could not leave her mother. She said she was so sorry. She said, "Please take Maple for a few days until she figured something out. Please, please take her somewhere safe." She handed him the duffel bag of Maple's things. She kissed Maple on the forehead and she shut the door. That is how he ended up on the bench outside the Tim Hortons on Bank Street with 2 garbage bags and a 4-year-old. When he finished telling me all of this, sitting at my kitchen table in Westboro at 1:45 on a Tuesday, with a mug of tea he had not touched cooling in front of him, he put his head down on his arms and he made a sound I had not heard him make since he was 8 years old. I sat across from him and I did not touch him because I knew if I touched him he would shatter, and I needed him in one piece for what came next. I said, "Spencer, look at me. Do you still have the notebook?" He nodded into his arms. I said, "Do you have the bank statements showing the property tax payments?" He nodded again. I said, "Do you have any text messages from Rosamond where she called the house a gift?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he lifted his head and he looked at me and he said, "I have an email. From 2019? She sent it to both of us. She wrote it like a letter. She said, 'This house is our gift to you and Janelle and the baby. You don't owe us anything. We just want you to have a home.'" I said, "Spencer, go to bed. Sleep in the den on the pullout. Do not check your phone. Do not call Janelle. Do not do anything until I tell you. Do you understand me?" He said, "Mom, I think I lost everything." I said, "You did not lose anything. Listen to me. You did not lose anything. You are about to find out what you actually have." I sat at the kitchen table for another 2 hours after he went to bed. I did not cry. I have not cried in front of a problem since 1992, when Owen was diagnosed, and I learned that crying does not move paperwork forward. I made a list on the back of a hydro bill. I wrote down every single thing Spencer would need to gather. The notebook. The bank statements going back 5.5 years. The email from 2019. The utility bills in his name. Any receipts for repairs? Photographs of him doing work on the property tax assessment notices addressed to the household, mail with his name on it at that address, the lease, if there was one. There would not be a lease. Rosamond was too clever to put anything in writing that would create a tenancy, but the absence of a lease was its own kind of evidence. I went to bed at 3 a.m, and I lay on my back and I thought about Rosamond. I thought about the church coat. I thought about the way she had told her own daughter on a phone call that Spencer was mentally unstable. I thought about Maple's untied boot, and I made myself a promise that I had not made since the night Owen died. I promised that this woman was going to learn, in a way she would remember for the rest of her natural life, what it meant to take something from my child. In the morning, I called in to Henderson Mowat and I told my managing partner, a woman named Bridget, who has known me since I was a file clerk, that I needed to take 3 personal days. She did not ask why. She said, "Whatever you need, take 5. I love that woman. Then I called my friend Devorah Steinmetz-Rau, who is a family law lawyer at a small firm on Elgin Street. Devorah and I went to McGill together 100 years ago. She has been practicing family law in Ottawa for 31 years. She has seen everything. I told her, in the briefest possible terms, what had happened. She said, "Bring him in at 2 o'clock today. Bring everything." Spencer woke up at noon. Maple woke up at 8, and I made her pancakes shaped like maple leaves, because that is her name and because she thought it was the funniest thing she had ever seen. I did not let Spencer see Maple until he had eaten and showered. I told him to wear the gray sweater. I told him to shave. He did not ask why. I think he was grateful to have someone telling him what to do. We sat in Devorah's office at 2 o'clock. Devorah looked at the email from 2019 for a long time. She looked at the notebook with 5.5 years of payments written in Spencer's careful block printing. She looked at the bank statements. She looked at the utility bills. And she asked Spencer one question, which was, "Did your mother-in-law ever, in writing or in person in front of a witness, refer to the house as belonging to you and Janelle?" Spencer thought for a long time. Then he said, "At Maple's baptism, she gave a toast. She said, 'To my daughter and son-in-law in their beautiful new home.' Everyone heard her. My mother heard her. My Uncle Garth heard her. My Uncle Garth heard her. Janelle's cousin Magdalena heard her." Devorah wrote that down. Then she leaned back in her chair and she said, "Spencer, I want to be careful here because I am not your real estate lawyer, and the property issue and the custody issue are 2 separate matters, but I will tell you what I see." She said, "On the custody side, your wife handed you your daughter and asked you to keep her safe. That is not abduction. That is a parent making a decision in a moment of crisis. We will document this immediately. We will file for an emergency interim custody order this week. Given that your wife appears to be under the coercive influence of her mother, and given that you have a stable parent willing to provide housing, and given that the child was voluntarily placed in your care, I believe we have a very strong position," she said. "On the property side, you need a different lawyer, and you need one fast. But I will tell you what I know: resulting trusts, constructive trusts, unjust enrichment. These are the doctrines that exist in Canadian law precisely for situations where someone has paid for and contributed to a property over a long period of time in reliance on a representation that the property was theirs." The email from 2019, if it says what you say it says, may be one of the most important documents you own. The fact that your name is on every utility bill, that you paid the property tax, that you did repairs, that there are multiple witnesses who heard the property described as yours, all of this matters. None of it guarantees anything, but it matters. Spencer said, "I don't want the house. I just want Maple, and I want her to get what she gave me." Devorah said, "Spencer, listen to me carefully. You may not want the house, but your wife and your daughter need a home. And the only person who can make sure that home is safe and stable is you. So you are going to fight for the house, not because you want it, but because Maple needs it, and because Janelle, when she is no longer being held hostage by her mother, is going to need a place to bring her daughter home to. Do you understand? He understood. Devora referred us to a colleague of hers, a real estate litigator named Pradyumna Bhattacharya, who I will tell you right now is one of the most terrifyingly competent human beings I have ever met. He took the file the next morning. He read the email from 2019. He read the notebook. He read the bank statements. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just said, "Mrs. Rosamond Whitfield is going to receive some correspondence." I sat in his office and I watched him work, and I thought about Owen, my husband, who had taught my son to write things down. I thought about how a man who has been dead for 19 years can reach forward through time and place a hand on his son's shoulder just by having said one thing, once, a long time ago. I thought, write it down, write it down, write it down. That is how we win. The first letter went out on a Friday. It was a demand letter, formal, on Pradyumna's firm's letterhead, outlining Spencer's claim to a beneficial interest in the bungalow on Sherwood Drive, pursuant to the doctrines of resulting trust, constructive trust, and unjust enrichment. It detailed the financial contributions. It detailed the email from 2019. It noted the witnesses to the baptism toast. It demanded, by way of opening position, that Rosamond either transfer 50% of the property into Spencer's name within 30 days, or pay him a lump sum representing his contributions plus the appreciation value of the property over the 5.5 years, which Pradyumna had calculated at just over $290,000. The same week, Devore filed for emergency interim custody. The motion materials included photographs of the garbage bags. They included a statement from Spencer's friend in Hindenburg. They included a statement from Janelle's cousin Magdalena, who, it turned out, had been waiting for years for someone to do something about Rosamond, and who was more than happy to swear an affidavit detailing the toast at the baptism and several other incidents besides. They included a screenshot of the email from 2019. Rosamond had her lawyer respond within 4 days. Her lawyer, who I will not name because she is a perfectly nice woman who was given a bad file, sent a letter trying to characterize Spencer's payments as rent. Pradyumna's response was 3 pages long and contained the phrase, "No tenancy agreement was ever executed," and the characterization of these payments as rent is contradicted by the contemporaneous written representation in your client's own hand that the property was a gift, attached as Exhibit A. The custody hearing happened 12 days after I found Spencer on the bench. Janelle came to the hearing. She came alone, without her mother, which was the first sign that something had cracked. She testified when asked that she had voluntarily placed Maple in Spencer's care, that Spencer was a good father, that she had been under significant emotional pressure from her own mother, and that she wanted to work with Spencer on a shared parenting arrangement going forward. She did not look at Rosamond's lawyer when she said it. She looked at Spencer. Spencer looked at her. And I saw, sitting in the gallery, the first crack of light in a dark room. The judge granted interim shared custody. Maple would live primarily with Spencer at my house until further notice, with Janelle having unsupervised access every weekend. Janelle, for the first time in her adult life, would have to make decisions for her own child without her mother in the room. 2 weeks after that, Rosamond's lawyer sent a settlement offer. It was not a good offer. Pradyumna rejected it. He sent a counteroffer with a forensic accountant's report attached, detailing the precise value of Spencer's contributions adjusted for inflation, the appreciation of the property over the relevant period, and the calculation of the beneficial interest. The forensic accountant's report was 47 pages long, and Pradyumna had it ready within 10 days because Pradyumna does not lose. Rosamond's second offer came on a Wednesday in December. It transferred the bungalow on Sherwood Drive into Janelle and Spencer's joint names, with Rosamond retaining no interest. Pradyumna accepted it on the condition that Rosamond pay Spencer's legal fees in full and that she sign a non-disparagement clause that prevented her from contacting Maple's school, doctor, or daycare without Janelle's written consent for a period of 3 years. She signed it. Of course she signed it. She had been a senior public servant. She knew when to fold. Spencer and Janelle did not get back together right away. That part is theirs to figure out, and it is not for me to put in a story. What I will tell you is that Janelle moved out of Rosamond's condo in January and into the bungalow on Sherwood Drive, and that Spencer and Maple lived with me through the winter, and that by the time the tulips came up at Major's Hill in May, Spencer was sleeping in his own house again. 3 nights a week at first, then 4, and that I had not seen Rosamond's church coat in months. I will also tell you this. 2 days after the settlement was signed, Janelle came to my house with a small wrapped package. She gave it to me at the door. She did not come in. She said, "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Thank you for not letting him drown. I was drowning too, and I didn't know how to swim. I'm learning." The package was a small framed photograph. It was Maple at the kitchen table at the bungalow with flour on her nose making cookies. On the back, Janelle had written, in pencil, she wants to be a paralegal when she grows up, like Grandma. I cried then. I cried like an old woman who had been holding her breath for 40 years. If you're watching this and you're a parent, or a grandparent, or someone who loves someone who has been quietly taken apart by another person who has more power than they should, I want to tell you something. Write it down, whatever it is. Whatever you have given, whatever you have built, whatever was promised to you, write it down. Date it. Keep the email. Keep the receipt. Keep the text message. Not because you expect to need it, because the day you need it, it is the only thing that will save you. And I want to tell you one more thing. When someone hands you a 4-year-old in a garbage bag full of clothes and tells you they have nowhere to go, you say, yes, you do. You say it before you know how. You say it before you have a plan. You say it because that is what love does. The plan comes later. The plan is allowed to come later. But the yes comes first. If you have a story like this, if you're in the middle of one right now, leave a comment. Tell me what state or province you're in. Tell me what year it happened. Tell me what you wish you had known. I read everything. I do not always reply because there are too many of you, and I am an old woman with arthritis in her wrists. But I read. And if you want me to talk about something specific in another video, like what to do in the first 48 hours, or what kind of lawyer to call, or how to talk to a child about a parent who is gone, tell me. I will do my best. You are not alone on that bench. You never were. Somebody is coming. And if no one is coming, then you become the somebody for somebody else someday. That is how we keep each other alive in this country. One bench at a time. I have been turning this story over in my mind for a long time now, and I think the part that stays with me most is not the bench, and not the locksmith, and not even the settlement. It is the notebook, a small black notebook with a coil binding, the kind you buy at Shoppers Drug Mart for $2, filled with my son's careful block printing. 5.5 years of dates and amounts. He kept it because his father told him to, 20-some years ago, in a kitchen in Westboro on an ordinary Tuesday night. Owen could not have known. He was just teaching his boy a small thing. But that small thing reached forward through time and saved my granddaughter's home. I think about cause and effect a great deal at my age. Nothing in Spencer's life that mattered, in the end, was an accident. Rosamond did not lose because she was unlucky. She lost because she had spent decades believing that her position, her pension, her church coat, and her ability to control her own daughter would always be enough. She had never been taught or had forgotten that the world keeps its own ledger, and that ledger does not care how respectable you look on a Sunday. Every time she told Janelle she was not capable of making her own decisions, she was teaching her daughter to be afraid. Every time she called the house a gift in writing, she was building, brick by brick, the case against herself. She did not see it. People who are certain of their own power rarely do. And Spencer did not win because he was clever. He is not particularly clever. He is not particularly clever. He won because he was decent and he wrote things down, and when he had nothing left, he answered the phone when his mother called and told her the truth. That is not a small thing. That takes a kind of nerve that most people never develop because they have never been forced to. What I want my granddaughter, Maple, to learn from all of this, when she is old enough to understand it, is that there are 3 things she must build in herself, and no one can build them for her. The first is honesty, with herself most of all, because a person who lies to herself will be ruled by anyone who tells her the truth about who she is. The second is the patience to learn the boring things, the paperwork, the law, the numbers, because those are the bones that hold up everything else, and the people who skip the bones end up on benches in November. And the third is the kind of stubbornness that does not look like stubbornness from the outside, the kind that lets you sit at a kitchen table at midnight and make a list on the back of a hydro bill and not cry. Not yet, because the crying is allowed later, after the work is done. If you take only one thing from my story, take this. Be the person who writes it down. Be the person who answers the phone. Be the person who, when somebody you love is on a bench with 2 garbage bags, says yes before you know how. The how comes. It always comes. But somebody has to say yes first.